Hello, Clarice. Welcome to Beauties and Beasts, a podcast for all things Beauty and the Beast. Due to the graphic nature of this content, listeners' discretion is advised. So, on this podcast, I talk about a lot of fluffy Beauty and the Beast type romances where people fall in love despite their different appearances or past mistakes and end up changing for the better. But in real life, it doesn't always work like that. When the Beast truly is a monster in terms of personality, there's nothing really romantic about it. If you know your Disney history, Beauty and the Beast was the first animated film to be nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars in 1992, almost 10 years before animated films had their own category in the Academy Awards. Sadly, it was defeated by the psychological horror film The Silence of the Lambs, starring Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, who also won awards for this film. It was sad for Beauty and the Beast, but if you watch Silence of the Lambs, you can see why it won, as it is a brilliant movie, as it is. Ironically, this film has a Beauty and the Beast dynamic of its own, between a young, beautiful FBI agent in training and a cannibalistic serial killer. The dynamic is similar to the relationship we talked about in the last episode with Assassination Classroom, and you could say it's a bit of a predecessor to the Harley Quinn and Joker romance. However, unlike the majority of relationships we discuss on this podcast, this is not a healthy one. Before I get into this, I'd like to thank my $5 plus patrons this month: Anime Guy 1101, Arvin Joshua Rocks 15, Dead as a Doe, Loki Gamer, and Tyrannosaurus Venom. Thank you for your continuing support. And you too can show your support by becoming a patron by clicking that button or following the link in the description, patron.podbean.com/beautiesandbeasts. This episode is currently being streamed for $10 plus patrons only and will be available for $5 plus patrons before public release on Thursday. Or you can also show your support by buying my merchandise at disneyfanatic23.redbubble.com. Redbubble now has backpacks and duffel bags for those of you who will be going back to school, if that's possible this year. And of course, face masks if you're going out, but you still want to be able to express yourself. My asexual and demisexual pride flags are among my current bestsellers for you aces and demis struggling to find your flags and show your pride. Note that I won't be holding a public stream this month, as the recent racist and homophobic comments I've gotten on my YouTube channel in response to my support of the LGBT community and Black Lives Matter. I just need some time before doing another public stream, as people claiming to be my fans and fellow bronies have said some very hurtful things, not just about myself, but others. I don't tolerate that kind of disgusting behavior on my channel. So, let's leave that dark place and go to another dark place. Sorry if I stumble a bit, but this is kind of a heavy topic. The movie The Silence of the Lambs was adapted from the 1988 novel by Thomas Harris, which was actually a sequel to his 1981 novel Red Dragon. And that one was adapted to a film called Manhunter in 1986, though it wasn't well received. But it was remade in 2002 with Anthony Hopkins reprising his role as Hannibal Lecter. And it's weird that they made the first part third. While Red Dragon contains some background information on the cannibalistic serial killer Hannibal Lecter, you actually don't need to read or see it before Silence of the Lambs, as that features Clarice Starling as the protagonist. I will mostly be talking about the movie, while briefly mentioning its 2001 sequel Hannibal, adapted from the novel in 1999. Why? Because I want to mainly focus on the twisted relationship between Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter. If you haven't seen the movie already, it is available on Netflix at the time that I'm recording this. Though one more warning, this episode contains mentions of cannibalism, sexual assault, emotional manipulation, murder, and also some brief mention of transphobia. And definitely not for the faint-hearted. I myself had to take a breather after watching Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal back to back, and stayed away from meat for a while. Yeah, I was that traumatized. However, it's necessary that we cover this to acknowledge the fact that some people aren't capable of change. And as much as we love Beauty and the Beast, not all relationships should be romanticized. Anyway, Silence of the Lambs starts out with the FBI in training, Clarice Starling, played by Jodie Foster. Young, lovely, but also strong, intelligent, and determined, as we see in the very beginning, where she's on a training course, and we see her in action. Because she majored in psychology and criminology at the University of Virginia, her mentor, Jack Crawford, tasked her to interview Hannibal Lecter, psychiatrist and cannibalistic serial killer. Quite the profile. In hopes that he'll have some insight on the psychological profile of the current serial killer on the run, Buffalo Bill, who has been killing women and taking their skin. Now, the brilliance of this film, right from the start, we see that while Clarice isn't the only woman in her field, the ratio is still skewed. And even when she's in her sweaty gym clothes, the majority of men can't help but leer at her. Even when Clarice arrives at the psychiatric prison, the head psychiatrist, Dr. Chilton, immediately hits on her, saying that he could see why Crawford had sent her, a pretty woman, to turn Lecter on. Clarice is given several warnings regarding Dr. Lecter. Don't tell him anything personal, stay away from the glass, don't accept anything he gives you. Spoiler alert, she breaks all of these rules, yet somehow don't really lead to consequences. In the short run at least, but more on that later. When Clarice goes in to see Hannibal, all the other inmates leer at her, but Dr. Lecter addresses her with respect and courtesy. He humors her for a bit, calls her out for her slip-ups, and even psychoanalyzes her. Though Clarice is thrown off, she challenges him to point his perception at himself. Getting nowhere with him, Clarice starts to leave, until one of the other inmates, multiple MIGs, throws his semen at her. Lecter calls her back, saying he would have never let that atrocity happen. That he may be a cannibal and a creep, but he's all about common courtesy. He agrees to help Clarice advance in the FBI and lead her to Buffalo Bill. Later, Clarice learns that Miggs, who had disrespected her, is dead. After talking with Lecter, he was found with his tongue lodged in his throat. Clarice doesn't know how to feel about that. A man killing another man for her sake. Nonetheless, when one of Lecter's clues leads to a face jarred in formaldehyde, she goes back. I will skip the criminological details and cover the main points. In their meetings, separated by glass, Hannibal and Clarice continue to treat each other with respect. Hannibal finding Clarice charming and intelligent. It's hard to say how Clarice feels about the situation, but implied that she acknowledges that Hannibal sees her as a person rather than a meal, contrary to how other men treat her. Obviously, when I say meal, the other men have other types of meals in mind. Even Jack Crawford, her mentor, would leave Clarice out of the loop sometimes because certain matters were too sensitive to discuss in front of a woman. Lecter, however, does not insult her intelligence, despite her gender or how pretty she looks. And he doesn't assume that she can't handle a gruesome topic. I mean, she is investigating several homicides after all. I mean, it's supposed to be part of her job, no matter what her gender is. Even a moment of genuine concern when Lecter hands her his towel after she comes in drenched from the rain and shaken up after seeing that face in the jar. Regarding the case, Lecter makes a bargain that Clarice tells him something personal, and in return he'll tell her something about Buffalo Bill, quid pro quo. She agrees, despite the warnings, not to let him get inside her head. Hello, this is how they manipulate you. Clarice tells him of her father, the town marshal, who was killed while stopping a burglary when she was just 10 years old. She'd then gone to live with her uncle on his ranch before running away, but she doesn't specify why she ran away. Hannibal helps Clarice realize that Buffalo Bill thinks he is a transsexual, as they say in the movie, though that is really not an appropriate term anymore, and that the moth lodged in the victims' throats is meant to symbolize change. And let me just say that the book and the movie have been heavily criticized for being transphobic and homophobic, presenting transsexualism as a psychosis and having a transgender serial killer. Not entirely wrong. However, I would like to point out that Lecter says Buffalo Bill was probably rejected for sex reassignment surgery due to past sexual abuse. That he is not a real transgender but only thinks he is. That hating his own identity makes him a trans woman as a result of abuse rather than the abuse being a result of him being transgender. So I think the movie's trying to say that transgenderism is a real thing, but sometimes people will mistake their own identity due to some other underlying problems. And if those issues are not worked out, it can lead to other issues like developing a knack for serial killing. But, of course, I am not an expert on psychology, so don't take my word on that. But I can see why it can be seen as demonizing transgenderism, and I do not blame my trans friends for feeling offended by this movie. Although, I do keep in mind that this was the 80s/90s, and it was a different time, that book and movie are products of their time, and you know, it's also a horror, so it's really hard not to be offensive in a horror movie. On the other end, I can see what some people might become as a result of discrimination from society. That doesn't make their actions any more justified. But again, overall, remember the book and movie are products of their time. Anyway, the case becomes a higher priority when a senator's daughter, Catherine Martin, goes missing and the FBI believes it to be Buffalo Bill. Clarice, at the request of Jack Crawford, tells Lecter that the senator will have him transferred to a federal prison with a great view of the beach like he wants if he can help them save Catherine. Here is the betrayal that often happens in these Beauty and the Beast plots, the test to the relationship. Even after Lecter learns about the lie, Clarice still goes to see him on her own accord. He sarcastically says, "People will say we're in love." Though the FBI team has been taken off the case, Clarice is still determined to save Catherine. But first, Lecter asks why she had run away from her uncle's ranch. And she confesses that she'd woken up in the middle of the night hearing screaming. It was the lambs that her uncle was slaughtering. And she didn't want the lambs to die. And she grabbed one of them and ran, thinking that she could probably save at least just one. But then she was caught, and the lamb was killed. And she was sent to live in a home. At night, she could still hear the lambs screaming. And Hannibal Lecter says, "You think if you can save Catherine, the lambs will stop screaming?" Clarice says yes. And hence the title, The Silence of the Lambs. Roll credits. As Clarice is pulled away by the guards, Lecter hands her back her case file, brushing his finger against hers, the only time they touch in the entire movie. Lecter then escapes, and while Clarice's friend thinks that he might come after her, Clarice doesn't think so, saying that he thinks it might be rude. And she finds a note from Lecter in her case files, telling her to investigate the first victim, a large woman who had been a seamstress. And from this, she realizes that Buffalo Bill has been skinning his victims to make a woman suit for himself, keeping them alive for a few days and starving them to, well, loosen the skin. I'm not comfortable talking about this. I'll be honest, between Lecter eating people and Buffalo Bill torturing women and then skinning them so he can wear them on his body, I don't know which of these two are sicker in the head. You know, as killers, of course. Long story short, Clarice locates Bill, shoots him in self-defense, in the dark no less, saves Catherine in time, and then she graduates the FBI Academy with honors, and gains a celebrity status for her work. But at the graduation ceremony, she receives a call from a familiar voice. "Well, Clarice, have the lambs stopped screaming?" Lecter then goes on to say, "I have no plans to call on you, Clarice. The world is more interesting with you in it." And Clarice can't promise that she won't try and find him. And Lecter closes with, "I'd love to stay and chat, but I'm having an old friend for dinner," as he is eyeing Dr. Chilton, who had ridiculed him in prison. If you don't want to see this relationship spiral into something toxic, it's best to end it here, where they don't end up together, and Lecter settles with leaving her be in return for how courteously she's treated him, and he's grown somewhat fond of her. That's where I prefer to leave it. However, if you feel brave enough, watch or read the sequel Hannibal, which is... let me put it this way. When Jodie Foster read the script, she refused to return and reprise her role as Clarice unless she was allowed to direct it, and was instead replaced by Julianne Moore, who looks nothing like her. No offense to her as an actress. As Jodie Foster says, what happens in the sequel is an insult to the character of Clarice Starling. Just totally contrary to how strong and independent and intelligent she was. I won't go into the full plot, as is much more graphic than its predecessor, and Clarice is barely in it. But it takes place 10 years later, and Clarice is a full agent by now. However, during a raid, she tries to call it off when she sees the female suspect carrying her baby in her arms. But her inferiors don't listen to her when she calls it down, because she's a woman. And they rush in and shoot up the black gang. Oh, wow, so now this suddenly relates to today. Well, the difference is that this gang was actually armed with semi-automatic weapons. And when the leader holding the baby shoots at Clarice, she has no choice but to shoot her back. And with her baby right there. Even though Clarice had tried calling it off, she is blamed for the death of her teammates. Okay, just saying, it was those idiots' faults for going against her orders. But of course, it's easy to put the blame on the female who'd had no choice but to bring out her weapon against another in self-defense. And yet, in real life, the white men in law enforcement will kill unarmed suspects, not just black ones, mind you, though they are the majority of the unarmed ones that get hurt, and not get reprimanded for it. The justice system is seriously so flawed. Anyway, Clarice is given a chance to reopen the Hannibal case, as he is still on the run, at the request of one of his previous victims, out for revenge. The only one to survive him, but had been severely disfigured and crippled. Clarice and Hannibal don't meet again until the very end, though Hannibal is still very much shown to be obsessed with her. As Gary Oldman's character says, "What do you think? Does he want to fuck her, kill her, or eat her?" And his servant responds with, probably all three, though I can't guarantee in what order. But Lecter's only object is degradation and suffering, nothing to romanticize. That he takes the guise of a mentor, but only to dominate, not to encourage. The sequel does give more insight into why Lecter is the way he is. He only eats the rude, which is why he doesn't go try to murder Clarice, because she's always been polite and courteous to him. The book says that his cannibalism was stemmed from the childhood trauma of watching his sister get eaten by hungry Nazis, though the filmmakers were not too happy with that explanation. I'm not too happy with it either, to be honest. And the ending is where it gets controversial. Lecter ends up kidnapping Clarice and drugging her, and then attempts to feed her the brain of her colleague who tried to ruin her career, while he is still alive. Not a pretty picture. Oh boy, I felt like barfing, honestly. The book ends with Clarice joining Hannibal in the feast and agreeing to be his lover, and then they have sex and then run off into the sunset. Yeah, I don't buy that ending either, and neither did the movie. In the movie, as Lecter has Clarice's ponytail caught in the fridge, he kisses her, but she handcuffs their wrists together. There is a moment before he kisses her when it looks like he's about to eat her face, but he stops himself. And when she won't tell him where the key is, he gets a meat cleaver and threatens to cut off her wrist. And after a pause, he says, "This is gonna hurt, you know, Clarice." And he brings the cleaver down. And then we see the cops show up at the house and Clarice looking out at the lake with both of her hands. And the next we see Hannibal, he is on a plane with his arm in a sling. So he ended up chopping off his own hand, not Clarice's. It's a messed up story either way, but I prefer the movie's ending for what it is. At least here, Lecter regains some of his humanity and finds he cares about Clarice too much to truly harm her, and Clarice remains unsullied and uncorrupted by him. I don't care how much chemistry they had in prison meetings, but Lecter was too far gone to be redeemed. In the end, he didn't even give up his killing or cannibalism, and even corrupted a little boy. I don't want to get in that. And drugging the one woman you like and making her a cannibal does not reward you with a happy ending. And Clarice in Silence of the Lambs, as I said, was set up to be a strong character dedicated to her sense of justice, not someone who would go off with a violent, manipulative monster, drugged or not, even if Anthony Hopkins himself ships it. This is a case where the beauty didn't tame the beast, but the beast corrupted the beauty. And the beast had all the power in the end, that they weren't equals. We learn a lot about love and acceptance from the Beauty and the Beast tale, but we have to keep in mind that we can't enter a relationship thinking we can fix or change a person. Change can happen as a result of love, that's true, but changing for the better is not something that intentionally happens. It's not something you want to go in and try to force to happen. A person has to want to change for themselves, not just for others. In Lecter's case, he didn't want to change, but he did want to change Clarice. He wanted to make her like him, and that wasn't healthy. And this is why I prefer to think of Silence of the Lambs as the only story in this trilogy. Clarice and Hannibal are like two ships passing through the night, but remain on their own decks. They both get what they want. Clarice overcomes the odds and her personal fears in saving a woman and catching a killer. Lecter gains his freedom, and both of them find temporary solace in finding one who treats the other as an equal. But I like to leave it there and forget that Hannibal ever happened. Hannibal did get a TV series adapted later, but I didn't watch that, and I was kind of afraid to be honest. I can only take so much on the subject of cannibalism. And this is from me, who's also an Alistair from Has Been Hotel fan. Side note, while quoted often, Hannibal actually never says, "Hello, Clarice," in Silence of the Lambs. Closest he ever says to that is, "Good evening, Clarice." Although in Hannibal he does say, "Well, hello, Clarice," on a phone call. But he never really steps out of the shadows and goes, "Hello, Clarice," like it's often referenced in other movies and television shows. It's like the "Luke, I am your father, and we're gonna need a bigger boat" lines that often get misquoted over and over again. Alright, so... okay, Anime Guy 1101 just entered the chat. Well, you just missed my entire analysis of Silence of the Lambs, so I'm sorry about that. But thank you for joining in the end. I did try doing this at 9 p.m. rather than 8 p.m., but on the other hand, this is a heavy topic, so I wouldn't blame people if they didn't come in for the live cast, because, I could barely get through this. Alright, so, but I can tell you that, of what I'm going to be doing next time. I figured I missed it. ADHD got me again. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry about that, anime guy. Well, I'm glad you came anyway, and... honestly, maybe it's okay that you missed the live cast, because I don't know if I can answer any more questions about this. Well, you'll hear everything else soon, because once the recording's processed, I will upload this for $5 plus patrons, so you'll still be able to hear it earlier than everyone else. So, next time, because of the Black Lives Matter movement, I would like to cover a movie that has many racist themes. So once again, I'm covering another heavy topic. What am I doing with my life? Because we need to talk about racial prejudice, and this movie is often called a Beauty and the Beast tale. And you may know the famous line, "'Twas beauty that killed the beast." Yes, I am referring to the original King Kong, which at its core was a movie about white people expressing their fear of blacks. While this aspect is less apparent in the remakes, you'll see once from them, Hollywood's treatment of people of color has not really changed that much in the past century. I will discuss this more in the next episode coming out August 6th, earlier for patrons. If you want to attend streams and gain early access to future episodes, click that patron button or follow the link and become a patron today. And be sure to check out the merchandise on Redbubble, including my intersexualist mask design supporting the LGBTQ community and the Black community, because people who are oppressed by the majority need to band together to achieve equal rights. Okay, so, sorry that this is ending when you just entered Anime Guy, but I'm kind of done, because I'm really emotionally spent from all that. Oh, but question, Anime Guy 1101, so you're going to talk about all versions in general, or just the original? I'm mainly going to talk about the original, but I am also going to talk about the two remakes. The one in the, I think it was the 70s, I'll have to double check, and the one by Peter Jackson, the more recent one. I won't be talking about Kong Skull Island, because, from what I've seen, the story is vastly different here. But yeah, I'll mostly be talking about the original and its two big remakes. Alright, so until next time, remember, serial killers are not romantic in real life, so don't think anyone can change from love alone. Real life ain't a fairy tale. And remember to watch what you eat.